Well, it is like if you kill a guy, they're like, well, shit, dead guy. But it was a wounded guy. Now it's like, oh, now we need 2 people to go take him out. So then you just took out 3 people by shooting 1 guy in the leg. Pro tip. Hey everyone, my name is Justin Taylor. I'm a MilTuber person and former US Army Bradley commander, and I'm here to answer your questions about how realistic vehicles are in Arma. Arma players drive through forests like they're in a logging vehicle. How expensive would that habit become? It would become very expensive very fast, although you probably wouldn't have to worry about that because you probably wouldn't live long enough to have to worry about that. Forests are a bit of the pain in the ass for armored vehicles. One, because it's hard for them to traverse through. They usually have to look for some opening that they can go through because you can't necessarily drive a tank through super dense forest. It's going to get stuck. It's going to get caught on things. And when that happens, it's a very easy target to take out and it won't be as effective. Really, it's not in the best interest of vehicles like that to be inside of forests because they are better out in open areas where they can use the maximum range of their guns and outrange the other things that they want to kill or would try to kill them. But yes, it would be very, very expensive to have to fix all the things you break by constantly running into trees and getting all your stuff caught up in bushes. What does Arma make look much easier than it is in reality? I would say in general, anything to do with maintenance. Obviously, the most realistic thing to happen would be to have your vehicles break down constantly. I have a feeling that would not be good for gameplay. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of focus to actually just keep the vehicles running as a whole, not even trying to fix them if they get damaged or something like that. So the fact that every time I get into a vehicle in Arma and I know for a fact it's going to turn on and nothing is going to catch on fire randomly is a little unrealistic, but it's also a nice break from reality. What does Arma get right about operating armored vehicles? The thing that Arma gets right that I think a lot of other video games get wrong is how much crew coordination it takes to actually keep those things fighting. In a lot of the games, if you are in the vehicle, you are driving it, aiming it, and commanding it all as a single person. But in reality, you have to have really, really good teamwork and communication between all the crew members to get everything to happen right. So the commander needs to be telling the driver where to go, coordinating with other vehicles, telling the gunner what to shoot at, managing ammo, communicating with hire, all that other stuff. And a lot of times it's hard to communicate inside of those things. They're super loud. There's a lot of smoke and gas coming off from the gun and the vehicle. It's a little bit way more chaotic in real life than it is in the game, thankfully, but it takes a lot of teamwork and crew cohesion to make it all happen perfectly. How vulnerable is a tank without infantry support? A tank is very vulnerable without infantry support. Basically, a tank without any kind of infantry support is a sitting target. One thing to keep in mind is that when you are inside of a vehicle all buttoned up, you're not sticking out of the hatch, you have very little situational awareness of what's actually going on around you. It's very easy to hit a tank in a very vulnerable position if it doesn't have infantry to cover it from the sides or the back or far ahead where it can't see behind a hill or something like that. You never, ever, ever want to operate any kind of armored vehicle without any kind of infantry support. And if you look at militaries that do have that kind of tendency to not have infantry support, those are also the ones that end up on Reddit getting blown up pretty easily. Why should players stop treating every armored vehicle like a tank? Probably because most armored vehicles are not tanks, and the way you want to treat a tank is probably also not how you should actually treat a tank. Most armor on armored vehicles that aren't actually tanks are really only there to protect against some light machine gun fire, shrapnel from artillery, and maybe a glancing blow or two. The armor on an armored vehicle is the last-ditch effort for it not to get blown up. So if you are actually getting hit, that means probably steps 1 through 10 of surviving that engagement failed completely. So you should probably leverage those more. There's this thing called a survivability onion, and at the very bottom is don't get killed, and that's where your armor actually comes into play. But everything above that, like not being seen, not being there in the first place, not getting hit, those should be followed a lot more than just hoping that your armor actually works. Which crew member has the hardest job, driver, gunner, or commander? Well, as a former commander, I want to say that it is the commander, but each one does have its own set of skill issues that you kind of have to work through. But I'll still stick with commander because you basically have to know how the entire vehicle works start to finish while also coordinating with all the other vehicles around you. The gunner, really, his main focus is just scanning for targets, pressing a button to engage them, and the driver is mostly just listening to exactly what the commander is telling them to do and trying not to fall asleep in the process. And they fail a lot of the times. Oh, I had this one driver who would constantly fall asleep. The man could fall asleep like you've never seen before. And so half the time he would just fall asleep right as we're supposed to be moving through a convoy. And I'd be screaming at him through the intercom and he still wouldn't wake up. So I'd have to climb out on top, go down, kick him in the top of the head from his head sticking out of the hatch, scream at him in real life, and then get back into my seat. And then, of course, you know, the next time we stopped for more than 5 seconds, he'd fall asleep. Sometimes my Arma crew uses a sabot round on a target that barely deserves the coax. How often do real gunners accidentally fire the wrong weapon or ammunition in combat? Probably less often than you think, but realistically, it doesn't really matter as long as the target's dead. See, there is something that you want to avoid called target overkill, which is kind of like the no fun button when it comes to armored vehicle fighting. You really want to preserve the ammunition that you need for certain targets for those certain targets. So if you do shoot an armor-piercing round at some dude holding a pistol, yeah, that guy is super, super, super dead. However, if you run out of armor-piercing ammo and then a tank pops up, you're kind of screwed. So that's really the thing you want to think about more. If a crew loses all its tires / tracks, but the gun still works, is it now a bunker? It depends on the vehicle type. If you are in something like a tank that their only job is to be in that vehicle and fight, odds are the crew is going to try to stay there and fight it out as long as they realistically can. If it's something like an armored personnel carrier or an infantry fighting vehicle, odds are they're probably not going to stay in there for too long, but each vehicle does have a way to manually do those kinds of things if you lose power or if you get stuck. Sometimes you might stay there if you know the vehicle is going to get recovered soon and it's an easy way to defend it while you're waiting. But if you're in the middle of a massive fight and you know that the round that took out your ability to move is about to take out your ability to live, you're probably better off just getting out of the vehicle. When do we think Bohemia will add tracked vehicles? Actually, it's funny. They were talking to me in the hallway about that. They said it's going to be in... They said around that time it's going to happen, although they said it might have to get pushed back a week or two. What small vehicle detail would most players overlook, but a former crewman like yourself would immediately recognize? For me, I like to see if the buttons all actually work or do what they're supposed to do. There's always little details inside the turret that are mostly there for things like maintenance or checking if things work, making sure that all the lights actually turn on inside the turret, or like little details of how to see or interact with things. So the first thing I would do is try to do a lamp test. Basically hit the button that turns on all the lights on all the buttons to see if they work. It has absolutely nothing to do with gameplay, but it's one of those cool little details that now that I said it out loud, they're gonna have to put it in the game. The lamp test button. It should be easy. I say that as a completely lay person. Be like, it turns all the lights on. It's super easy in real life. Since the LAV-25 was primarily a Marine Corps vehicle, can you explain how it would be plausible that the US Army borrowed them for Everon? Actually, the US Army did used to use LAV-25s very briefly. See, the nice thing about the LAV-25 is that you can kick it out the back of an airplane. So there was a time where the 82nd Airborne of the US Army was experimenting and using them quite a bit. And they even recently tried to test that out a little bit more when they were doing the whole M10 Booker program that never actually worked out. So it is not only plausible, but it did actually happen in real life. What common Arma vehicle tactic would probably get a real crew killed? Basically any tactic that involves just gunning it straight for the enemy in order to create some kind of shock and awe effect that doesn't actually work. One of the biggest benefits of any vehicle that has a gun or weapon attached to it is that odds are that thing can shoot really, really, really far. So there's no point in charging up really fast to get really close to a target where you can shoot them from several kilometers away and the guy with the rifle can't even see you. What command or phrase does a former crewman never forget hearing? Well, I'll tell you, and it's probably not the one you're expecting. It is the command of clear and make safe. If you are a crew person of any armored vehicle practicing gunnery, practicing how to shoot the weapons on your vehicle, and you hear clear and make safe, that means you just screwed something up and you're probably going to get yelled at someone who's too sleep deprived to care about your feelings. I heard that more than anything else. What does hull down actually mean? Hull down is when you lower your armored vehicle to as low as possible to the ground, and the only thing sticking up is actually the turret or in a better situation, the optics on your vehicle that are usually stuck up on top specifically for this. Vehicles use cover and concealment just like dismounted infantry do, so it makes a lot of sense for them to stay behind cover looking for targets while not presenting themselves as a target. When the gunner or commander actually identifies the target, they'll get a firing solution, pull the vehicle out of cover, fire, and then go back down into that hull down position. It's a very good way of staying alive if that's what you're into. How hard is it to see a mine on a road, really? It depends on the mine and it depends on the road. A lot of the times if you see a mine very visibly on a road, they're not actually trying to hide it. They're just trying to make something that's going to slow you down with the anticipation that you're going to go around it where they probably have an ambush set up. The real risk that you have to worry about is when you're driving through nature or a field or some kind of grass. That's way harder for them to find. They don't give off heat signatures, and a lot of the times they're designed to be hidden or buried. So you actually seeing them is a pretty rare occurrence, and by the time you do find it, a lot of the times it's too late. What vehicle behavior would immediately tell you that an Arma crew has no idea what it's doing? For me, it would be not utilizing the coaxial machine gun on your vehicle. Your coax machine gun, even though it is the smallest weapon on that platform, is probably your most versatile and also carries the most amount of ammo. So if I see someone lobbing high explosive shells at one guy running in the middle of a field, I probably know that that person doesn't know how useful that coaxial machine gun actually is, or he just has a thing for killing people more violently than necessary. How hot or cold does the inside of an armored vehicle become? Well, it depends entirely on how hot or cold it is on the outside of the vehicle. Some armored vehicles these days will have things like air conditioning, but they're harder to come by than you think, and a lot of the times they don't work, and trust me, they are not a priority if it's just for crew comfort. It does tend to get super, super hot in those things. The gun is going off, the engines are going, and a lot of times the exhaust is going to go in your face, even though you're inside the turret. However, being hot or cold is still better than taking a round to the face, so I vote being kind of sweaty or cold as opposed to getting blown up. In the Bradley, the exhaust is to the front right where the commander sits, and so sometimes if it was winter, and there's a hole where the link, all the links from the coax and the brass go out underside the turret, so they're like right there. So sometimes in the wintertime, you're freezing, the breeze will come in and it'll blow some of the exhaust into the turret, which is like, probably shouldn't be breathing that in, but for a second you're like, it is really warm. That is kind of nice. That is really nice. Is a mediocre crew with excellent teamwork better than several individually talented crewmen? Better teamwork is typically going to outmatch better crew individual competence every single time. Kind of one of the fun facts about armored vehicles is that they are actually pretty simple to get fairly spun up on. It doesn't take a lot to train someone to do their particular job fairly well, or at least good enough. Really what it comes down to is overall crew cohesion, kind of anticipating what each person is going to have to do before it has to be done. And all those things are going to make you way more effective as a fighting platform, as opposed to the loader or the gunner being 5% better than everyone else. Some say that a 7.62 by 51 millimeter round could penetrate a BTR at the correct angle. Is that realistically possible? A lot of things are going to come into play, like the angle that you were shooting it at, what part of the vehicle are you shooting at, like the sides, the back, or the front, how far away you actually are, because the round is going to lose energy at a distance, or it depends on the kind of ammo you're actually using. So is it possible? Yes. Does it happen reliably enough for you to bank your life on it? Probably not. And even if it does penetrate, that small of a round probably won't do the damage necessary to keep you alive or do any actually real hurt to the vehicle. Is a 50 cal able to punch through BTR armor? Generally, yes. Also, there are armor piercing 50 cal rounds called slap rounds, which are basically tiny little sabots like the ones you would find on a tank. Although most things typically can actually take out a BTR, and a 50 cal, if you can manage it, is actually a pretty good way of disabling it. Shooting a BTR with a 50 cal might not make it blow up like a can of gasoline with a match, but it probably will make it combat ineffective even if you just destroy its ability to move around. Are the passenger compartments realistically cramped? I would say they're actually more cramped in real life. And the reason for that is because in a video game like Arma, you typically don't have all your extra gear in there with you. But in reality, all that extra space that you might think is cozy or roomy, or you can lean your head back inside an actual one, is going to be taken up by things like medical equipment, extra ammo, guys' backpacks, food, water, all those other things that we also have to cram inside of those vehicles. So yes, incredibly cramped, but that doesn't mean you can't make it cozy like a home. What kind of damage would make a vehicle combat ineffective? A lot of things can make a vehicle combat ineffective, not just combat damage, but probably one of the easiest ways to do it is to do a mobility kill. So on a tracked vehicle, that means taking out the track so it can't move anymore, or on a wheeled vehicle, just taking out enough of the tires so that it's really hard for it to get from A to B. There's other things you can do, like shooting the sensors or shooting the periscopes that the crew can't see out, and at that point, they can't aim or really do anything. But there's a lot of ways of disabling or taking out a vehicle that doesn't just make it blow up necessarily. In real life, there is more of a focus on just total destruction of the vehicle as opposed to something that would just take it out of combat temporarily, because in real life, the other side is just going to try to tow it back, fix it, and get it out fighting again. But if you actually destroy it, you never have to worry about that tank ever again. It's the opposite with infantry. Is the BTR-70 bad, or are players simply using it incorrectly? Both things can be true at the exact same time. The BTR was wildly unpopular with Soviet forces back in the day, and it was really just an interim platform for them to get to the BTR-80. It saw very little production, it saw very little action, and these days it's regarded as a huge piece of crap, basically, and not for the wrong reasons either. But that doesn't mean that in game you can't use it effectively and realize the limitations that it does have of not having a lot of armor and relatively light armament itself. But it can still be effective if you try to be careful with it. What is the one thing Arma Reforger gets surprisingly right about Cold War vehicles? I would say that they are harder to use than you might imagine. There is a lot that goes into actually operating these things, and it's a lot more than just pointing and pulling the trigger and the driver going on roads. A lot of thought needs to go into keeping the vehicle alive, A, and then getting in a position where it can actually hit targets, B, and all the strategy that comes with that and using it to its most effectiveness, not just trying to rack up kills on the kill feed. Would real commanders accept the level of vehicle losses that players consider normal? They absolutely would not. And it's for a big reason that you really don't get in video games as much. And that is you have to keep using that vehicle for later. In a game, it might make sense to sacrifice a vehicle or two in order to accomplish an objective and win the match. But in reality, that would mean that you wouldn't have that vehicle for the next however many missions you have to run after that. So they're incentivized to be way more careful and try to preserve their forces a lot more, knowing that that one fight that they're in isn't the only fight they're going to be in. And that tank or whatever vehicle has to ideally survive the entire war, not just that one fight. The players I play with sacrifice vehicles faster than I can learn their names. Is that authentic armor doctrine? No, largely because in real authentic armor doctrine, there are living humans inside of those. And if your vehicle gets blown up, you don't get to respawn. Unless you spend a lot of time around lead as a child, you probably develop some kind of self-preservation instinct. So most crew members are also in the business of keeping themselves alive and not necessarily sacrificing themselves just so you can take one extra intersection that afternoon. How hard is it to actually see targets out of a gunner's sight? It's not hard to see the target. It's actually very easy to see the target inside of the gunner's sight. The real trick is trying to find them, because a lot of those optics are very magnified at long distances. It's kind of like looking around a room with a straw. So it's not hard to see through the straw, but it's hard to actually find those targets to begin with. And that's why a lot of modern vehicles now have 2 or more different ways of viewing the world around them so that multiple people can be scanning for targets at once. Does Arma give crew members too much information compared with what they would know in reality? Can a driver actually see? Yes, the driver can actually see very well. And if anything, it's easier in real life because you can manipulate your body a little bit more and peek around certain corners to get different angles or all that other stuff. The gunner and the commander, in terms of guns and ammo and state of the vehicle, also have a pretty good idea of what's going on at all times. If something is wrong with, say, the tracks, you immediately feel it in your whole body and you can hear it. Or if the gun messes up, you immediately know what it is based on the certain flavor of ka-chunk it went instead of bang. The vehicle feeds crews a lot of information, so you generally do have a really good idea of what's actually going on. If anything, I'd say you guys give less information to the crew in real life. There's no way of actually doing that, though. How much of successful armored warfare comes down to the vehicle, and how much comes down to the crew? It depends a lot on the vehicle type and the crew itself. If you took the best armored crew in the world and tried to stick them in some kind of World War I tank and put them up against any conscript crew in a modern tank, the modern tank is probably going to win 9 times out of 10. It's really when you have tanks that are relatively from the same generation that those kinds of things matter a lot less than people think. And a lot of it comes down to who sees who first and who has a better angle on the other one. It's really just who sees who first these days. Whoever shoots first wins. It's like 99% of it. At what point should infantry dismount instead of staying inside their vehicle? So before you actually go out on your mission with your armored personnel carrier or your infantry fighting vehicle, you're going to have something called a pre-designated VDO or vehicle drop-off point. That is a place that you have identified is safe enough for the infantry to get out without getting shot immediately, but also close enough to where they don't have to walk several miles to the objective. There are times that the vehicle is taking a lot of heavy fire or gets stuck that it's smart for them to dismount. And it's also a really bad idea to just drive straight onto the objective and kick them out right on it. And you're probably just walking into an ambush at that point. So it really pays off to pay attention to the terrain, to really figure out a good place that is that nice golden mean of all the things you're looking for in order to accomplish your objective. What is the difference between an APC, an IFV, and a tank? That is a great question. They all do slightly different things. An APC is really any vehicle who is armored, and their only job really is to carry infantry in the back. They will usually have some kind of armament on top, some kind of heavy machine gun, or maybe a grenade launcher, even a missile launcher, but really those are for self-defense of the vehicle itself. The evolution of that was the infantry fighting vehicle, and that is there to not only carry the infantry, but also support them in the actual fighting. And those are going to be the ones that have actual turrets on top with crews that stay in and stay for the fight itself. Their main job is to carry infantry, but they're also there to fight. It's kind of, in the name. Tanks are only there to fight. They don't carry any extra people. Their whole thing is just having a big gun on top. Ideally, they're going to be working with the infantry focusing on infantry targets and the tank focusing on tank-like targets, while also drawing fire, absorbing some rounds here and there, and really trying to break through defenses that the infantry would struggle with, like buildings or bunkers or really big trench lines. There's also things like self-propelled artillery guns that also look like tanks, and armored fighting vehicles like the Russian BMP-T that's there for like tank support. And we used to have more categories of vehicles, but now that we've kind of figured out the whole ground fighting game, those are the main ones you'll see these days. Who would win in a fight? M1A1 Abrams or T-72? A lot of the times when it comes to tank-on-tank fighting, it comes down to who sees who first and who can get the first shot off. Those tanks were designed for different kinds of warfare. The Abrams was more designed for defensive-style warfare, while the T-72 was intended for those fast blitzkrieg-style charges across Europe. But it's also important to remember that they are used differently, and so a one-on-one battle is a little bit of an unfair comparison, but generally my money is going to go towards the Abrams with the better gun, better sights, and the better armor. How useless is the 25mm against a tank? In most cases, pretty useless, even if you are using the armor-piercing version. However, there have been some documented cases of Ukrainian fighters taking out other tanks like T-90s with the main gun on a Bradley. That's absolutely not what they're designed to do, and I would not bank your life on it, but if you are smart and you know what you're doing, you can pull it off. But also, ideally, there's other weapons that just do a better job of that. But I guess, it's better than nothing. That's all the questions that I have for today. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you did learn something that will make it so that you can keep your vehicle alive for more than like 30 seconds.